mother was murdered.
I was just a boy.
There is darkness everywhere, Mr. Lincoln. You how to see them, how to destroy them. I will give you names and you will hunt them down. It falls to us.
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is one of those films that immediately announces its intentions through its title alone, daring the audience to either reject it outright or lean into its audacity. Released in 2012 and adapted from the 2010 novel by Seth Grahame-Smith, the movie takes one of the most iconic figures in American history and reframes his life through a dark fantasy lens. Rather than treating Abraham Lincoln purely as a statesman shaped by politics and war, the film imagines his journey as one driven by personal loss, secret training, and a hidden war against vampires who have embedded themselves into the fabric of early American society. The result is a blend of historical drama, supernatural action, and stylized spectacle that aims to entertain by colliding the familiar with the unexpected. The story opens by presenting Abraham Lincoln not as a monument or legend, but as a man shaped by trauma. His early life is marked by hardship, poverty, and most importantly, the death of his mother, which the film reinterprets as the result of a vampire attack. This single change becomes the emotional core of the entire narrative. Instead of history pushing Lincoln toward greatness through abstract ideals, the movie grounds his motivation in revenge and justice. The loss of his mother instills in him a burning hatred for vampires and a desire to protect others from the same fate, even before he fully understands what he is fighting. This origin story frames Lincoln as a reluctant hero, someone who never sought power or fame, but was forced into conflict by circumstances beyond his control. As the film progresses, Lincoln's life unfolds in parallel tracks. On the surface, he is the Abraham Lincoln history remembers, a self-educated young man, a rail splitter, a lawyer, and eventually a rising political figure. Beneath that public identity, however, he is secretly being trained as a vampire hunter. His mentor, Henry Sturgis, introduces him to the hidden rules of this supernatural world, explaining the strengths and weaknesses of vampires, and revealing that their influence stretches far deeper than Lincoln ever imagined. This dual existence becomes one of the film's defining ideas. Lincoln must constantly balance his public responsibilities with his secret mission, and the tension between these two lives fuels much of the drama. The vampires in the film are not random monsters lurking in the shadows. They are portrayed as organized, strategic, and deeply entwined with American history. The movie makes a bold thematic choice by linking vampirism with slavery, suggesting that vampires thrive on exploitation and view humans as disposable resources. This metaphor is not subtle, but it is central to the film's identity. The American South is depicted as a stronghold for vampire power, where plantations serve as feeding grounds, and the institution of slavery allows vampires to hide in plain sight. By tying the supernatural threat to real historical injustice, the film attempts to give its fantastical premise a deeper moral weight. Visually, the film is unmistakably shaped by the creative influence of director Timur Bekmambetov and producer Tim Burton. The action sequences are highly stylized, often defying realism in favor of exaggerated motion, slow-motion impacts, and visually striking choreography. Lincoln's weapon of choice, an axe, becomes an extension of his character, symbolizing both his humble origins and his role as an executioner of monsters. The action scenes are designed to feel mythic rather than grounded, transforming historical settings into stages for supernatural combat. Whether it's a stampede of horses, a burning battlefield, or a collapsing structure, the film constantly pushes spectacle to the forefront. Benjamin Walker's portrayal of Abraham Lincoln is central to making this strange premise work. He is tasked with embodying both the familiar image of Lincoln and a completely reimagined version of the man as a physical action hero. Walker approaches the role with surprising sincerity, avoiding parody even when the material risks tipping into absurdity. His Lincoln is intense, brooding, and driven by a sense of moral duty that evolves over time. Early in the film, his motivation is largely personal revenge, but as he matures and becomes more aware of the broader implications of the vampire conspiracy, his goals expand to encompass the fate of the nation itself. As Lincoln's political career advances, the film increasingly blurs the line between historical events and supernatural interpretation. Key moments in American history are recontextualized as part of the hidden vampire war, suggesting that battles, political decisions, and even the Civil War itself are influenced by the presence of these creatures. The vampires are portrayed as actively trying to shape the nation's future, supporting systems that allow them to maintain control and feed without resistance. Lincoln's rise to the presidency is therefore not just a political victory, but a strategic turning point in this secret conflict. The Civil War becomes the ultimate battleground where history and fantasy fully collide. The film suggests that vampires see the war as an opportunity to expand their influence, while Lincoln recognizes it as a chance to strike a decisive blow against them. This interpretation turns familiar historical imagery into something more fantastical, with night battles, supernatural enemies, and heightened stakes. While the film does not attempt to replace real history, it overlays an additional layer of meaning onto it, inviting the audience to imagine that unseen forces were at work behind the scenes. One of the more interesting aspects of the film is how it handles Lincoln's personal relationships. His romance and eventual marriage are portrayed as genuine and emotionally grounding, offering him moments of normalcy in a life otherwise dominated by violence and secrecy. These relationships also raise the stakes, as Lincoln's loved ones become potential targets for vampire retaliation. The film uses this vulnerability to humanize him, reminding the audience that beneath the legend and the axe-wielding heroics is a man who fears loss and struggles with the consequences of his choices. Henry Sturgis as Lincoln's mentor serves both as a guide and a moral counterweight. His own mysterious past and ambiguous motivations add complexity to the story, challenging Lincoln's black and white view of good and evil. Through their interactions, the film explores ideas of sacrifice, duty, and the cost of waging a secret war. Henry's guidance is not always comforting, and his lessons often force Lincoln to confront uncomfortable truths about power, violence, and the nature of monsters, both human and supernatural. The villains of the film are presented as charismatic, cruel, and ideologically driven. Rather than acting as mindless predators, they are shown to have their own worldview, seeing humanity as livestock and history as something to be manipulated for their benefit. Their leader embodies this arrogance, treating Lincoln not just as an enemy, but as an obstacle to a future where vampires rule openly. This framing elevates the conflict beyond simple action, turning it into a clash of philosophies about freedom, control, and the value of human life. Tonally, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter walks a fine line between seriousness and pulp entertainment. It takes its central character seriously, respecting his historical importance, while simultaneously indulging in over-the-top action and supernatural spectacle. This balance will not work for every viewer, but it is clear that the film is committed to its vision. It does not wink at the audience or treat its premise as a joke. Instead, it asks viewers to accept its rules and engage with the story on its own terms. The pacing of the film reflects its ambition, moving quickly through Lincoln's early life before settling into a rhythm that alternates between political development and vampire hunting. At times, this can feel rushed, as major life events are compressed to make room for action sequences. However, this approach also reinforces the idea that Lincoln's life was defined by constant pressure and competing demands, leaving little room for rest or reflection. The narrative momentum keeps pushing forward, mirroring the relentless march of history toward conflict. The film's thematic core ultimately revolves around the idea of hidden struggles shaping the visible world. By portraying vampires as a secret force behind historical events, the movie suggests that history itself is layered, with unseen battles influencing the outcomes we take for granted. Lincoln's role as both president and vampire hunter becomes a metaphor for leadership itself, implying that true leadership often involves confronting threats that others cannot or will not see. While the film was divisive upon release, its willingness to take risks is undeniable. It does not attempt to be a traditional biopic, nor does it fully embrace the tone of a tongue-in-cheek parody. Instead, it occupies a strange middle ground, blending reverence and reinvention. This approach allows it to stand out among historical adaptations, even if it challenges audience expectations about what a film featuring Abraham Lincoln should be. The production design and visual effects further reinforce the film's unique identity. Period settings are rendered with a dark, almost gothic atmosphere, emphasizing shadows, firelight, and dramatic contrasts. The supernatural elements are integrated into these environments, making the world feel cohesive rather than cartoonish. Even when the action becomes exaggerated, the visual language remains consistent, helping maintain immersion in this alternate version of history. As the story moves toward its conclusion, Lincoln is forced to confront the limits of violence as a solution. Despite his skill as a hunter, he comes to understand that the true defeat of the vampire threat requires systemic change, not just individual battles. This realization aligns with his historical role as a leader who sought to reshape the nation's moral foundation. The film uses this parallel to suggest that the fight against oppression, whether literal or metaphorical, demands both courage and vision. In the end, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter presents a version of Lincoln that is larger than life without stripping him of his humanity. By combining real historical struggles with supernatural fantasy, the film invites viewers to reconsider familiar narratives through a new lens. It is a story about grief transformed into purpose, about secrecy and sacrifice, and about the idea that even the most well-known figures in history may have carried burdens far heavier than we imagine. Whether viewed as a bold experiment, a cult curiosity, or a flawed but fascinating reimagining, the film leaves a lasting impression simply by daring to ask a question few others would. What if the fight for freedom was even darker, bloodier, and more literal than history ever recorded?